Hello, listeners. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd. Welcome to Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, an eMarketer podcast. This is the show where we talk about how retail collides with every part of our lives. I'm your host, Sara Lebow. Today's episode topic is the most interesting 2025 trends we have heard outside of eMarketer. Let's meet today's guests. Joining me for today's episode, we have podcast regular VP of Content, Suzy Davidkhanian. Hey, Suzy.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Also with us is a special guest for today's podcast. It's our Chief Content Officer, Daniell Wigder.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Thank you for being here, and thank you both for coming to see me in person to record this one. Okay, let's start with NRF, which just happened last week. I want to hear from each of you what a takeaway that stuck with you from a session was. Suzy, why don't you go first?
So I had a couple of them, but I think there are two that if it's okay for me to give you two, as in my usual style.
You're breaking the rules already. Great.
So the one was, there was someone from a trends company who talked about something that seems so simplistic, and yet I think it's worth saying out loud. With social and with everybody having so much power with their phones, and so communication just keeps moving at a faster clip, there isn't such a thing anymore as one trend that lasts for a longer period of time, and that trends probably pop up every day, if not more often. And so it's really hard for brands to capitalize on trends. Now, I'm extrapolating a little bit more than what she had said, but from a retailer's perspective, I think it then becomes really challenging to figure out what is the trend you want to stand behind, and is there such a thing as a trend?
What is considered a trend in this context? Like a fuzzy bucket hat or like wide pants?
All of it, right? It's like the colors, brands, the viral moments, whether it is a physical thing, whether it's an emotion, whether it's, she was even saying something that I thought was fascinating and that I never thought about, that if you want to increase, which I am certainly not advocating for this, but she was saying that if you want to increase engagement on certain platforms, which shall remain nameless, anger and tension and bad sentiments will help you get viral faster. So I think trends, you're right. It's a good question. It's such a big overarching comment. But the idea that you can't stand behind one thing and it's ever changing, and so that means you have to be really flexible and nimble, I think is probably one that everybody should stick to.
Sure. Part of me hates the let's incite anger, but I do get the let's put an outfit out there that a lot of people will think is ugly so that we can get some comments and also some people defending it and saying what they like about it.
Yeah, it's this weird tension, right?
What was your other rule breaker one?
I had the chance to go to the Saturday Retail Media Day, and the person from Costco, the gentleman from Costco, was talking a little bit about how they use their Costco membership as the middle of their flywheel, which is not news, right? But the way they were thinking about retail media is also a part of helping, it's an ancillary business, helping fuel their membership, and that's the number one thing that they sell. Also kind of not new, but what I thought was interesting, they group their customers into 4 different areas that the retail media is supposed to help with. So there are the non-shoppers, which are the ones that they're trying to acquire, so using retail media.
Aren't touching Costco yet.
Or a category. So it doesn't have to necessarily be Costco, because if you're on a Costco property, you're most likely a Costco shopper, but not the category shopper. Depends on if they're on-site or off-site. But then there are the ones that they're trying to win back, which are the lapsed customers. Then there are the ones that they know have recently left or are in the process of leaving, and all the signs are pointing towards that. So they're trying to rescue those. That I had never heard of that term. So I thought that was really interesting. And then, of course, there are the current shoppers that they're trying to grow, and how their retail media, everything that they're doing is thinking about those 4 different types of customers.
Was that 3 or 4?
4.
Okay.
Acquire, win back, rescue, and grow.
I got win back and rescue sort of grouped into one. It's good to think about those as 2 different ones, though. I know in New York City, a big leaving Costco reason is that you don't have a car in the city anymore. I wonder what their specific approach is to keep those folks around. Okay, Zia, what was your one takeaway?
Well, since Suzy had 2 takeaways, I'm going to go with 2 as well here.
Sure, of course.
The first one wasn't as much what someone actually said on stage, but just the direction of the conversation. So they had someone from American Girl and someone from Reebok on stage, and they were talking about kind of the digital evolution of their brands. But a very large percentage of the conversation had to do with the creator economy and had to do with how they were leveraging content creators. So it's interesting that whole area just kind of has taken over when people think about the digital evolution of their brand.
Yeah, that's fascinating for American Girl because like people have been making YouTube content of American Girl dolls like since I was a kid, like since YouTube started existing, I guess. Like that has been around for a long time, and it's smart of the brand to capitalize on that.
Yeah, and it's not just the girls who are doing it, but the parents as well. Which is
interesting. Like unboxing, here's what I got for...
And people who grew up with them, right? Who now have kids.
Did you guys grow up with American Girl dolls?
I did not, but my nieces did. Yeah.
Okay, the other thing.
Then the other one was a more concrete takeaway, which was from a session where they had the CEO of a retailer in Brazil, and he was talking about the fact that they do facial recognition for payments, dynamic pricing, and just a lot of things that aren't necessarily mainstream here, which seems like they have kind of proliferated more there.
Facial recognition for payments is one of those things where I'm like, I don't want that. No, it freaks me out. But as soon as they implement it in the subway, I'll be fine with it. Yeah. I'll be like, sure, I'm adopting it. You're saying I don't have to even take my phone out of my pocket. It's fine.
It's funny because I went to the JP Morgan booth to see, because that was their big reveal last year was the facial recognition. So I went to ask him about crypto payments and about how it's going with facial recognition. And the person was very lovely and was saying how, Clear and airports across the world, like there are lots of places where you're doing facial recognition. Yeah. And so it's making sure that retailers also start to feel comfortable with it. It's like not even talking about the consumer yet. It's like getting the retailer to feel comfortable with it. He didn't quite answer how it's going exactly, but he did. He was very informative.
What do you say about crypto payments?
I find this fascinating. We talk about this for a long time, but at the end of the day, when it comes to crypto and a retailer, because crypto is not new, it ebbs and flows. It's a currency. And so there are two things that the retailer bears risk. So it becomes more complicated. One is at what price is the value of that currency when you're making the transaction, which can fluctuate. So that's a problem for the retailer. But more importantly, they haven't figured out returns. And even though crypto is like a blockchain mechanism, so you could technically figure out what was the value of the cryptocurrency when you made the purchase of the good in dollars, it's still so hard. They're still so far away from a structural perspective. So it's very high risk for a retailer today, and they haven't figured out in his opinion, they hadn't figured out, which makes sense completely.
Yeah, that makes sense. My big crypto evolution was this year. Someone gave me a Bitcoin Gelt this Hanukkah, which was Gelt, normal chocolate coins, just with the Bitcoin logo on it.
That's so cute.
No actual Bitcoin.
Nope, crypto has made it into the candy chocolate market.
I love that.
Did anyone say anything at NRF that you disagreed with?
I mean, disagree is such a big word, but there was someone it was actually the same. There was a presentation on a bunch of different trends. And one of the ones that they were leaning heavily into is to bring play into your workplace. And
we're doing that right now.
Well, yes, we are doing it, but I think the way she articulated it, we were at the session together. I think the way she articulated it was a little bit too silly, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And it didn't feel as constructive as it could be. And yes, we do spend a lot of time at the office, and we do want to make sure that you are feeling like you can be creative and authentic and all these other things. But I just didn't, that sort of play equals culture is where we need to be, was hard for me to understand.
That feels like kind of a dated concept to me. I feel like a lot of the
tech
play initiatives, like the old tech offices, a lot of people kind of see through now. And even though it's good to have like lightheartedness in the office, I think that people see through having a foosball table being a sign of company culture.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I heard, which was not new this year, but just in the whole conversation about grocery, talking about how there will be cultural issues that will get in the way of digital grocery adoption. And I think it's pretty uniform in every country that there's going to be that sort of tactile component of grocery, people who want to go in and touch and feel. It's not that that's true in one country more than another, but rather if you have relatively affordable, convenient options, you will shift to buying some of your groceries online. It's more the availability of the offerings than it is a certain cultural preference in one place versus another for actually purchasing in person.
Gotcha.
It's so interesting because we talked to Shipped, and she sort of was telling us around how in their platform, you can pick the person you want to be your personal shopper. And if you do it regularly enough, they know your habits, and then you feel better that they're not looking for the wilted salad. They're, they're like checking to make sure that what you need and what you want is consistent over time. And maybe that's the way they're getting over that hurdle.
Yeah, could well be. And the whole personalization, right?
Yeah.
So I care about having hard grapes. That's one of my things. But there are other
hate
things.
having soft grapes.
Yeah.
I was talking about this last weekend.
Yeah. There are other things that I will give on, but the hard grapes just can't do it.
Well, did you guys see the Instagram post with, in Korea, they do packaged bananas where it's like a package, like every day is for the ripeness.
That's right. Different levels of greenness. Yeah.
Which I'd never seen that before. But now you have a personal shopper, depending, I guess, on the platform you're using. Yeah. That if you use them regularly enough and you treat them with kindness and respect and all the everything else, and they start to feel like they know you and they want to make you happy.
Right.
Okay. That is all fascinating. Let's sort of think ahead now. I know you guys are both going to ShopTalk later this year. Just Zia?
Nope. I will be there together with Sarah Marzano this year.
Gotcha. Okay. Zia and our colleague Sarah will be at ShopTalk this year. A bunch of other retail events are also on the docket. I know eTail is one of them. What are you looking forward to seeing at these events this year?
So I'll let Suzy talk to eTail, and I'll talk to ShopTalk for a little bit. So certainly one thing that we're going to see there this year is a big focus on retail media, which they've had before, but they've got a whole specific sort of division of the event that's going to be focused on that. So Sarah Marzano will be a part of that piece of ShopTalk. So that will continue to be an area of focus this year. One thing that was interesting that I heard in a conversation last night at dinner was a questioning of whether this is going to be the year of robotics with, Gen AI having taken off these past couple of years. Is this when we're going to kind of see it vaulted into, much greater adoption? And there's quite a lot of discussion. Some people felt that was the case, others didn't. But whereas I think the past few years, maybe you've heard a little bit less about it at, some of these events. It'd be interesting to see if that kind of comes back as a big topic of discussion.
Interesting. A lot of these things we're talking about, like personal shoppers, robotics, AI, they're such like, if you implement them well, then they'll be good. And if you don't, then they'll be so bad.
Yeah.
So I think that's, I guess, why it's important we're talking about them at these events so you can see how the first movers are implementing them.
I think at eTail, that conference starts a little bit more around the direct to consumer. Yeah. So there, I think it's a lot more about the connected experience, the true omni-channel or all channel, and how there's commerce everywhere and how to really seize the moment. I think there's going to be a lot of conversations around data and how do you measure both if it's successful, your campaign, but also how do you bring all that different data together to have a holistic picture of the consumer across different platforms.
Yeah, that makes sense. So talking to a lot of retail tech companies then, I'm assuming.
Yes. And on stage are a lot of brands who are trying to explain their different use cases of what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I have not been to ShopTalk. I have been to eTail. They have a huge shop floor there. So yeah. So we've talked on the podcast already about our eMarketer trends for this year. Suzy, you talked about gamification and loyalty. Are there any trends that you've heard from these events so far from folks outside of eMarketer that we should be keeping an eye on, an ear on?
One thing that I was talking about with someone from a company based in China about was social commerce. And one of the inhibitors there that they're seeing now is that the returns when it comes to social commerce actually tend to be quite high because you've got so many impulse purchases. Yeah. And so she was curious to hear whether we kind of expected to see the same thing as it, started to take off here. And it was an interesting discussion just around whether that was likely to be something that would, maybe slow it down a bit compared to what we might expect to see otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, we talked on the podcast last week about some Shopify data, I think, that showed that holiday returns were up like 28% over last year or something. I think that as social commerce explodes more and more, returns are only going to accelerate, and you either need to really tighten those return policies or find the right partners to make that viable.
It's so interesting though, because, for two reasons. One, we used to talk through like live streaming, especially where you get to interact with others around you, and the incidence of returns are lower on live stream shopping because you get to see and ask to see the bag in a different way or whatever, you're investing a little bit less impulse maybe because you're investing time and space in there. But the other thing from a purely social commerce is if you're buying it on the app, then it's unclear who do you return to. And so there's so much friction happening. Like if you're on Instagram and you go to the Macy's website, you're obviously buying it from Macy's, you're going to return it at Macy's. But if you're checking out in the app, that's probably
like in
very
TikTok,
difficult.
for example, which may or may not still exist.
Item to?
Yeah. That's a good point.
I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah. Something I brought up on the podcast last week, which is a whole other conversation, is just sizing has gotten worse. I don't have data to back that up, but sizing has gotten worse. I'm consistently buying things that aren't the size I expect them to be. It's like very unreliable, and that really adds to the returns.
We were just talking about that sizing. And the thing is, what I didn't see as much on the exhibitor floor was all these different sizing there was a time where it was like everywhere, like the holograms, the different technologies, like it was everywhere. I think now retailers need to find less obtrusive ways of doing sizing.
Well, because I saw a retail tech present at a conference I was at last year, and they were showing off in beta like a mirror that can size you.
Yes. Yeah.
That's really cool, but that's not available to me when I'm buying something on Instagram on my phone while I'm waiting for the subway. Yeah. So even though there are all these cool techs available, they are like the opposite of where and when you need them. I want to know my measurements in a reliable way and have sizes that are consistent, but that may be too much to ask for.
Well, and I think we've talked about this before, like, is this where Google Shopping comes in, where they understand your sizing because you've given them everything ahead of time, and they're like the facilitator to say like, oh, in this brand, you need this size, and in that brand, because they're winning, right? They're creating extra positive sort of halo for the brands, and they're making your life as the consumer easier. But I think we're a little bit ahead in that space.
Yeah. Okay, any final thoughts on events for the coming year before we wrap up?
Very excited for ShopTalk. They now have 2 events every year. So went to the one in the fall, which is in Chicago for the first time. Now we've got the big one coming up in the
Vegas.
spring. And I'm biased, but still by far the best retail event out there.
Yeah, I whenever I join you on a call from the Vegas one, I feel like you're always in the middle of walking like miles through the conference area.
It's hard not to walk miles through Mandalay Bay.
Yeah, it is a good show.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for being here, Suzy.
Thanks so much. This was super fun.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us, Zia.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we'll have to have you on more often.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you to our listeners and to our podcast editing team. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode of Reimagining Retail and eMarketer podcast. And on Friday, join Marcus for another episode of Behind the Numbers.